Please subscribe and like this video. You'd help us out. Welcome to the interviews with Richard Windmann. I'm Richard Windmann. I'm here with Maria Socolof, and she is a survivor of sibling sexual trauma and trauma-based chronic pain, which we're going to talk about today, which I find fascinating. She is an advocate for individuals living with chronic pain and for individuals and families facing sibling sexual trauma. She's an author and a researcher. Welcome, Maria.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Oh, no problem at all. So let's start at the beginning. Tell us a little bit about you and the work that you do.
Sure. The beginning would be my childhood, I guess. I'll just quickly glaze over that and get to the work I'm doing. But essentially, I really did have, as far as I remembered, a really wonderful childhood. Two parents that loved me, two older brothers, got to do gymnastics. I loved gymnastics. I competed all the way through college, got to go to college, graduate school, had really just kind of the perfect life as far as I knew. And it wasn't until I was 40 years old that everything kind of changed, and it was chronic pain that hit me. So I actually ruptured a disc in my neck. Actually, I really did have, as far as an echo, I don't know, that chronic pain that.
Sorry about the echo.
Okay.
Apologies.
It's okay. So it was when I was 40, and I, in fact, rolled over in my sleep and ruptured a disc in my neck. Who does that, right? But that's what happened. And from then on, I had ruptured the disc, and then I didn't know that was what had happened at first. So within a few hours, it hurt, but within a few hours, it really started to hurt enough that I even took my kids to school. I went to work, but by noon, I couldn't sit there anymore. And the pain was getting just more and more intense. And it was really got to the point of excruciating pain. I ended up having surgery within a week, and then went for 2 years, still with debilitating pain. And it was this chronic myofascial pain syndrome. So we can go back and talk about all of this, but I'll just kind of go quickly through everything first. So I was 2 years in pain, doing everything the doctors said to do, and nothing was working. Physical therapy, shots, medications, exercising, everything, and it wasn't curing me. And then at 2 years into this, I went to an intensive treatment of myofascial release therapy. It's kind of like, it's a body work, kind of like massage type of treatment. But it was at that intensive treatment that I went to. I went away for 2 weeks to Pennsylvania and got treated 3 times a day with this myofascial release treatment. And what happens with that, when your body holds in trauma, it eventually comes out, or it manifests in certain ways in your body. And mine was manifesting. It turns out as this pain. And that's why we couldn't figure out why it wasn't going away. It turned out it really was trauma-based. And now I've done a lot of research on that. And that's very common, in fact, but it's not even commonly recognized in the medical industry in a lot of places, sadly. But so after I was in this 2-week intensive, and it was at the end of the last day of the 2 weeks that my memory came back. I had a dream, actually, the morning before my last treatments. And the dream was of me as an adult, and my brothers as an adult, and one other person was there. But I was giving a presentation, and all of a sudden, one of my brothers walked up to me and touched me inappropriately as adults. And that's not what happened. I was a child, but it triggered my memory of it once I woke up. So then I was just blown away. I was 42 years old at this point and had absolutely no recollection of this ever happening. Couldn't even imagine that, I had this nice life. And since then I got married. I married my college sweetheart, had 2 kids, had a good job, an environmental consulting job. Everything was great. And it was so hard to comprehend this. It was just this, cognitive dissonance that was just wild. So, but I knew in my heart and soul and core that it was true, because the memory was so clear and so vivid. It was like it was just put in this little box in my head somewhere until it was time to come out, I guess, until my body was screaming at me to face it because I was in debilitating pain for 2 years. And
Yes,
then
yes.
that's when the pain came down. Yeah.
Let me ask you. So after the dream in your waking hours, did you now have the memory of what actually happened?
Yeah. The moment I woke up, I can still feel and picture it. I was lying in the bed where I woke up, and I felt this tingling sensation around my body, like somebody was drawing a chalk line around me, like at a crime scene. That's what I
Mhm.
felt like, and I just lay there, and the memory came back right then. Like the moment I woke up, the memory was unpackaged and clear, like it had happened yesterday. And even to this day, I've never had a memory. So even now, it's been 17 years, 15, 17 years since I remembered. And it's not that crisp anymore, which is good because
Yeah.
I know it's not sitting there unprocessed. I've processed it a lot since then. But when I remembered, yes, I remembered exactly what happened. I remembered what I was thinking. I remember what I did. I pretended I was asleep when I was molested. So it woke me up. But at the time I froze. So I was frozen there, but I remember thinking, okay, I'm going to pretend I'm waking up. I'm going to stretch. I'm going to, get up and leave. And that's what I did. So all that memory was very clear and vivid. And like I said, I knew in my core that it was true, but you think you might be crazy because it's like, how could this be when I lived this life that I thought I lived? And this was always in there. And then over time, I just started realizing all the connections and started putting together the physical things that were going on in my body. And so for me, and I was molested just once, and for me, I've tried to say, oh, no big deal, minimize it, but it still traumatized me,
Mhm.
and I've had to come to grips with that. But I forgot what I was going to say. Yes, sorry.
That's okay.
Oh, yeah.
Explain to us what myofascial pain is.
Yeah, it's essentially myofascia is the lining around the muscles. It's kind of like when you buy a breast of chicken and you see that thin lining that you can kind of pull off. That's the myofascia. Myo standing for muscle, fascia is the lining. So it's all this material or tissue that's surrounding all your muscles throughout your body. And in myofascial pain, the fascia often gets more rigid, and it's not as fluid as it normally should be because of stress. Can be a reason. There can be trauma too, like even the surgery. And surgery is what probably triggered the actual myofascial pain, because when I ruptured the disc, I was having nerve pain and other pain down my left arm. But after the surgery, I just was having this more general pain, even on the other side from where the surgery was, like on my right side, more so than it had been before. But so it can be triggered by emotional stress, that kind of stuff, trauma, physical trauma, and emotional trauma. But it's when it's a typical part of it is called trigger points, and a lot of us can probably feel like we've had knots in our muscles, and they get tight and sore. With myofascial pain syndrome or chronic myofascial pain, it's just kind of that on steroids, and it's so painful. The knots are so tight, and it kind of restricts blood flow and causes pain. There can be latent trigger points and active trigger points. Active ones are just ones that hurt all the time, and latent ones are, if you press on one, it's like, oh yeah, that does hurt. That's a latent one. And they can also refer pain to other places in your body. So you might be having pain in your head, and it's actually triggered by a trigger point somewhere else in your body. So a lot of times, when in the medical industry, they like to focus on where they see a specific symptom, and sometimes it's coming from somewhere else, even as the trigger points and also as the initial cause of it, which, like I said, could be emotions and trauma and other things that your body has just held in for so long, and it becomes a chronic state of fight or flight or freeze, really, that
Yeah.
your body is reacting to.
So the pain that you experience, we'll pretend we're in a doctor's office and I'm a pain management guy, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So is your pain on a scale of 1 to 10 when this is happening?
So when this is happening, so when I ruptured the disc, it was a 10. I felt like I was in labor for 3 weeks. I've had 2 children, and the epidural didn't work. So that was that pain. But once I got the surgery and I got the use of my arm back because I was losing function of my arm, the myofascial pain really was a pretty constant 8, which is extremely painful and debilitating. And it went on for months and months. And I did have some shots that brought it down to like a 7 for a long time, but it was still hovering over that for like a year. And then once I started reading about the mind-body connection, Dr. John Sarno has a book, and the myofascial release work that I did was John Barnes' method, and he has a book. And they talk about all these, kind of mind-body connections. Once I started reading that, my pain came down a little bit, and some of the shots were working for a little while, trigger point injections, but it didn't get me much further. So I was really around, that 7, 8 for a long time, then 5, 6, maybe for the next year. And then when I went to the myofascial release intensive, that 2 weeks intensive, when I remembered, I came back from that about 40 more percent better. So, which was huge, because I went from really wanting to be dead and wishing I were dead, to feeling a lot better and having hope. And that was really the critical piece that I needed, because I didn't have any hope at that point, that I couldn't imagine living the rest of my life in this pain. And then it was after I still, then I came back, and for the next 15 whatever years, I've been processing that trauma that, I have felt at times that, and I even hard for me to believe that I think this, but once I was getting into the emotional pain, I realized that was worse than or equal to the physical pain that I had. And that was an eye opener for me, because all I said is, I just want to get rid of this pain. I just want to get rid of this physical pain. And when I started digging deep and getting into that emotional pain, I realized why my body was doing this. And that's kind of what it does. It's masking, or it's just transferring to another way. And it was almost like I still couldn't handle the emotional part of it for a long time. But my body was still saying, there's something wrong here. You've got to face this. You've got to do something about this to manage it, or to deal with it.
Yeah. So I had a ruptured disc on my neck, C6-7. So
Same.
I had the fusion. Yeah. My left arm's all screwed up now. But I was years in pain because a rupture wasn't bad enough to operate on. And so I went a couple of years just doing nothing but pain medicine. And I'm talking everything from Tylenol 3 all the way up to fentanyl.
Yeah.
And after the surgery, I thought it didn't work because I was in even worse pain. And the recovery from that surgery took about 8 months before the pain subsided. And I never made the connection between the pain and trauma. At SCSA, we have a member, and he has 3 ruptured discs. And so if you can imagine, he has a lot of plates and a lot of screws and stuff. And he told me that the pain that he experiences is because of his trauma. And I didn't make the connection. And I told him, I said, are you sure it's not because of the plates and the pins, in your spine? Are you sure it's not that? Or are you sure it's trauma? He said, yes. But he couldn't explain to me, the connection. So can you explain to us, what's the connection between trauma and a known physical malady that would cause pain? What's the connection there?
Right. I can try. So it's interesting, because we just assume when there's some type of structural anomaly that is causing the pain. But that's not always the case. A lot of times there are a lot of x-rays that they've done of people with, or MRIs with people with bulging discs. And it doesn't mean that is actually the cause of the pain. We just assume. We like to look at the structural thing and say that must be it. But in fact, there's no definitive evidence to show that is the cause. So, because there are a lot of people with bulging discs and everything, and herniated discs, and they don't have pain. So that by itself shows that, well, maybe that's not necessarily causing pain. So why is somebody having pain with it and some people aren't? The best I can explain is that our bodies, I feel this with my body at least, that when there's trauma, it has to go somewhere. So your body, sometimes there may be a weakness somewhere. I had 13 years before I ruptured the disc, I had dropped a whitewater raft on my head and it crunched it. And I was a gymnast. I fell on my head, numerous times, or just fell and everything. So I did have all that trauma, and it can be a buildup of some of those physical traumas that, something might be a little off, but if there's a weakness there, it's like your body kind of goes, or it's easier for that to show pain in a way. I don't know if that's the right way to say it, but or manifest in that place. So for me, it was my neck pain, and the connection between the mind body stuff for me, I feel like going through this myofascial release therapy, I felt the connection, because when my pain started going away, like I have plates and screws in my neck, and I just assumed that was the pain and that was the restriction motion that I had. Even after my first myofascial release therapy session, for 2 years, I could only move my head this far. One session, he had his fingers on my back. It felt like muscles just melted. And I could, in one day, I could move my head. I hadn't done that for 2 years. And I just thought it was because I had a screws and a plate in my neck. So when I started realizing I was tensing, subconsciously tensing for years and years, and even probably at some low level before for years and years. But after I ruptured the disc, I was in that acute pain, and your body normally reacts to to reduce that pain. It was holding the muscles tight, and it gets stuck in a pattern of doing that. And it thinks it needs to keep doing that. So it's just kind of a maladapted brain signal that's saying, we got to protect. And it's the same in trauma. In trauma, we're reliving subconsciously what happened. And, when we're in PTSD and, when we're having PTSD symptoms or whatever, it's the same concept. So in people, so I haven't, this is what I say, my PTSD is physical pain. Like I don't have a lot of other symptoms. I have, sometimes I'm triggered by things. I have, bad dreams and stuff, but it's not startle response, some other things, but and even like the depression and all that stuff, I didn't have that. I had this physical manifestation of it. And I think maybe because I was able to repress the memory and really keep it out of my brain, I was able to keep all that other stuff out and have this charmed little life. But my body was holding in all this trauma. So I don't know if I'm answering your question, but
okay.
when I went through this myofascial release and my pain started coming down only after I started crying out about all this emotional trauma that I had, my pain came down. So I personally knew that now it was not this stuff in my neck. And, I still to this day don't know if I hadn't had the surgery, if it could have come down, because I do know people who have been in the situation where I was, and they didn't have surgery, and then they still did get better. So I still think I wouldn't maybe have the use of my arm. So I think I did need it, but yeah, so just having felt my pain come down with no other, because I took the drugs didn't do anything. I took the drugs. I, had the shots. They helped a little, but they ended up, the pain came back. So it was the only thing that reduced my pain. And here I am. I mean, I still deal with pain at a much lower level, a little bit every day, but I'm not incapacitated and debilitated and just the pain I was in before. And it was only by doing the emotional work. So I guess I'm just my own example, my one data point that I need to know that it was the trauma. And as I processed trauma, it came down and I could feel, and I, it's that subconscious bracing that just can get our bodies off. And if it's around a place that shows like it's some disc is out of place, then we just assume that's the case, that what is causing it. But a lot of times, and there's a lot of different illnesses and pain in other places and different conditions that people can have, chronic conditions, a lot of times that don't seem to be curable, that I've seen in other people and I believe are trauma-based.
So I was going to ask you that question too. So what's your pain level right now?
Yeah, I mean, right now, like a one, if that. Like right now,
Mhm.
I'm good. You know, I could sometimes after I sit for a long time, and again, you get in your brain like, oh, I can't walk for more than 30 minutes, and it starts to hurt, and then you start to believe those patterns, and just your brain just creates it almost. I mean, I hate to say this because if anyone told me like, I could just think my way out of it, I would, want to strangle them.
Mhm.
But it's not that. It's understanding that it's not like my neck healed from the surgery. My neck healed from the ruptured disc. It's
Right.
my body is still reacting. So it's just learning how to react differently and see it differently and act differently. Like know that when I had a change in sort of mindset when I thought, every time I walk for more than 30 minutes, it's killing me. It's killing me. Then I just kind of said, you know what? No, I'm getting stronger each time. If I just keep walking 30 minutes, I might get stronger each time. And then I don't know, all of a sudden I'm able to walk an hour, now, and it's okay. And even longer sometimes. Sometimes it hurts. And the other thing it tells me is not necessarily structural is because it's not consistent. Once I realized those things, like I said, don't assume it's going to happen in 30 minutes. And then I realized if I'm distracted or something else, or it's not every time. So it's not necessarily the conditions that I think are causing it. It could be the added stress or whatever else is going on, and still, as I'm processing, I'm still going back to therapy and dealing with some deep stuff that's coming up. So I've always thought that once I get through all that emotional trauma, the pain will be completely gone. I don't know if that'll happen, but it's come down so much that I still have hope that it can even get a little better. But yeah, right now I'm feeling good.
That's great. So let's talk about how you deal with your trauma. So for me, yeah, I was abused when I was a kid too. And um, what helped me was, I found a trauma informed and trained psychologist,
Mhm.
and she does ego state therapy as a primer and an adjunct to EMDR therapy. And that's a process, and it's kind of painful, but it worked for me. What kind of therapies do you go through to address your trauma?
Sure. The first thing, like I said, was that myofascial release, which actually brought up my trauma. So I didn't know I had any emotional issues and was not having any other symptoms of depression or anything like that. So it started for me with the body work, and when emotions came up for that, and that's when I realized. And then when I remembered and I realized I had this trauma, then I added to that. I did first. I just went to psychotherapy. I just asked for somebody who knew about chronic pain and um, yeah, a psychologist who dealt with chronic pain. But then, it took a while to find somebody. Then I tried somebody trauma, looking for trauma or incest. I said it was incest. I didn't even know. Like I was still not even sure what had happened to me. I was looking in dictionaries, like, is it incest? Is it this? Who do I call? So I think I asked the next therapist if they dealt with incest, and then the next one trauma. And I did have somebody. Then I did EMDR. The woman who did that with me, she actually combined it with somatic experiencing (SE), which is Peter Levine. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
No, no.
Yeah,
What's
that
up with that?
his name is Peter Levine, and it's somatic experiencing. And like somatics, it really tunes into your body and with bodily reactions you're having too. So it was similar. It was kind of a good transition for me from the myofascial work, which is hands-on work. The somatic experiencing is, in fact, the therapist did have a table, and sometimes I would get on it, and she would, could do some hands-on, but it wasn't the same massage type of thing. But it's like just feeling, even for yourself, just feeling what's going on, feeling that my chest is getting tight, that my heart is beating. Focusing in on what is happening in your body. And for me, like I said, my PTSD is all stuck in my body, it seems. So that was very effective. And she did the EMDR too. And that was good. It was it was intense, like you said. And but I did that for about 10 months, and then we moved out of state. So I didn't get to continue with her. I felt like I was making progress. So that was 2016. Then I moved and didn't do anything for several years. And I just, again, this last year started ISTDP. So interim short-term, ISTDP, interim short-term dynamic psychotherapy. I had heard about it through the pain world, like somebody who had had kind of trauma and emotion-fed chronic pain had said they had tried that, and I heard it a couple of years ago, and then another year later, somebody else said it. So I said, maybe I'll try this. And the person I have, he calls it, ITSDP, informed therapy, because he does that, but he's trauma informed, and he also does a lot of parts work with me right now. So that's what I'm kind of deep into right now. And I'm finding it really effective and really helpful to, we're digging into my 10-year-old and all the things she's thinking on there that I don't really realize. So those have been the best. I did tapping. I did, that EFT and emotional freedom technique. It's also called the tapping. It didn't really, again, I was trying to get at my pain, my physical pain with that. And it did help me process some of the emotional stuff. But I was still trying to determine whether it was reducing my pain. So that didn't really work. I kind of chalked that off. But I think all these things I've done were chipping off a little bit more of getting to the deeper trauma stuff that I'm now dealing with this ISTDP therapist. So yeah, I think a lot of it's just finding the right person. But I do think trauma informed is really critical. And I never really knew to ask that at first.
Yeah, I tell everybody that because, if you just go see a therapist, they're just going to do talk therapy with you. And it seems like in the last decade, there's, in university programs, they have, trauma specialties now.
Yeah.
And so I think that's really, really great. Yeah. So, most victims and survivors of childhood sex abuse that have PTSD or CPTSD, without exception, depression, anxiety, sometimes dissociative disorder. What type of symptoms did you have to deal with?
Yeah. Like I said, a lot. I felt like I didn't really have a lot, but now that you're saying them, anxiety came up, and it really didn't come up till after I remembered, and manifest as driving anxiety mostly. So I don't know what it was that all of a sudden I couldn't drive. And I couldn't drive long distances, even like more than 30 minutes. And especially in an unfamiliar place, I would get it's like my brain would turn off, I felt like. And as far as the dissociation too, I'll get back to that in a second. But the dissociative amnesia is what I had for 32 years. I didn't remember. So I feel like that's how I dissociated. And I do recognize now how I will dissociate sometimes. And I never, in minor ways. So I never really noticed it, or I didn't think about it or know what it was. So there was that dissociation. But then the driving thing, it happened in 2011. So I had remembered in end of 2007. And in 2011, I went on a trip with my kids, and we were flying. It was one of those trains, planes, and automobiles situations where we were supposed to fly back on a 1.5 hour flight, and the whole trip was 23 hours. And I ended up having to drive in the rain at 2 a.m. from Philadelphia to Baltimore, and my brain just kind of shut down. And I don't know what triggered that. I was with just my 2 girls. And I was, responsible for them. I don't know, but I felt like the blood just disappeared out of my head, and my body didn't know how to drive anymore. I was driving, and I was thinking to myself, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do with my foot. I don't know what to do. So luckily I pulled over in time, but I took a nap in the car in the middle of a dark rest stop with my 2 girls. I was so afraid, but I couldn't drive. So I was able to drive home the last hour, but not in a good condition, but I made it. But since then, like all of a sudden my driving was, and I finally realized it was an anxiety issue that at first I didn't know. I thought, well, why is my brain, I got brain, imaging and stuff, and everything looked fine. So, so I finally realized it was anxiety. And now I'm much better, and I've worked on it, and I've slowly gotten to do more driving, but I still have issues on bridges. So I don't know what it is. It feels something not safe to me. So I have that still, that anxiety. The depression only hit me when I was really deep in that first 4 years of my chronic pain. I started getting depressed from that. And what else? Yeah, those were the biggest. And then, the startling and the night, like some nightmares, but, not just bad dreams. I don't feel like they're intrusive, like really terrible. So, and then the pain and so that's been my most limiting thing.
Sounds like you were miserable for a while.
Yeah, I was very much, like I said, I just had dreams of driving off a bridge. Now that I remember, those are the words I used. And I had 2 kids, so that's what kept me going.
Mhm.
It was miserable. It was very miserable, but, so that's why I speak out now, because I'm here to say that it can get better. And, if you look at what's behind it, it's not fun and it's not easy, but, it can make a whole world of difference.
So, would you consider yourself an advocate? I mean, I know that you do research on this topic. Um, uh, how do I pose this question? So what do you do now? What are your
Yeah.
obviously you present this topic publicly,
Mhm.
so you're an advocate, I
Yeah.
would think. Well, what do you do now? What's your activities regarding this subject?
Sure. Yeah. So I published my memoir in 2020. And that was when I first came out with my story of the sibling abuse. Because before it was, I kind of didn't tell that part of it until I was publicly able to do that um, in 2020. And so I first was also talking about the chronic pain, and I would say it was trauma based,
Mhm.
and advocating, and talking where I could about that. It was about a year after that I felt ready to start talking about the sibling sexual abuse, because I didn't know anybody else, but I knew there had to be people out there, but I had never talked to or never heard of anybody talk about it. Um, so it just felt I just was getting a strong urge to speak out about it. So I joined a call on a group. Incest Aware was kind of a newly formed organization, just
Mhm.
kind of an internet thing, but we got a group together and met on a Zoom call. And that was the first time it was just amazing actually to be in the presence of other people who knew some of what you were going through. And because I had been alone in this whole thing the whole time, as far as the abuse goes, because I never identified with that because that wasn't my life. And then when I remembered at age 42, it just took a long time for me to even grapple with it. So I met some people there, and that led to what I'm doing now is with an organization we call 5 Waves. And we organized in the fall of 2021, and we became a nonprofit last summer, in the summer of 2022. 5 Waves stands for, well, there's 5 of us, 5 women who got together. 2 of us are survivors, and 3 are parents of children dealing with sibling sexual trauma. So the WAVES stands for Worldwide Awareness, Voice, Education, and Support around sibling sexual trauma and abuse. So we've been just kind of trying to bring more awareness to this. It's such a hidden, taboo topic, even within child sexual abuse. I think that we've made so much, made a lot of strides in clergy and other adult to child abuse, more so than child on child. And it is the numbers are hard to come by because there's not a lot of research even done on it. But they say it's the most common in the home because it's so secretive because it's so hard to tell your parents. You're going to just destroy your whole family because it's in the family. It's your brother or your sister, and
Yeah.
what are your parents going to do? So I think I repressed it for so long because and in therapy, this is sort of what's come up, is that I didn't want to break up my family. And that's a very common thread in a lot of sibling sexual abuse survivors.
Have you confronted your brother about the abuse? Or
I'm sorry, did I what?
have you confronted your brother about the abuse?
Yeah, I did. And so when I remembered, I just had to. I felt like part of me just wanted to make sure it was true, even though I knew in my heart and soul, but part of me didn't want it to be true. But yeah, so I wrote to him just about a few days after I got back from that treatment in an email. And I said, do you remember? This is what I remember. Do you remember this? And I got to say, very, very lucky, because he owned it. He apologized. He said, I'm responsible for all that you have suffered, quote. So that was such a relief, a huge relief. First that I wasn't crazy, that this memory was true, that I didn't have to, I knew people questioned people's recovered memories. So I was like, all right, I have unequivocal confirmation here that this is true. So I don't have to fight that battle of, people telling me it's probably not true. So I'm one of the lucky ones, honestly, who got that feedback. And in fact, the reason I could even I felt that I could even publish my memoir is I made sure with him, I told him I was doing it. I gave him parts. He never read it. He couldn't read it, which is fine. But I gave him the opportunity to read what I was saying. And I wouldn't do it till, he again gave this blessing. He said, do what you need to do, which is huge, and uncommon, really, from the advocacy work I'm doing now, just hearing so many other stories. Mine is pretty unique, honestly. And I got positive feedback from my parents. Again, it was as an adult. So, I think I think another reason I repressed the memory is we found a letter later. I don't remember this, but I had written, this was a letter my parents found in their attic when they were moving, after I had remembered now. Oh. But it was a letter that I wrote this nasty letter to my mother, saying, I hate you, all this stuff. And I don't remember ever having those feelings towards my mother. I always loved my mother. I have a great relationship with her. But my dad wrote in the corner of the letter, when mom wouldn't sleep with daughter. And he put the date, which was actually September.
Mom sleep with daughter. What does that mean?
So I have to figure this out, right? So I can imagine that my brother molests me. The next day I go to my mom and say, will you sleep with me? That's what I'm imagining. And what you would say to what I would say to my 10-year-old who might say that, like, go to bed. You're fine. Go to bed. Because I didn't say what was wrong, presumably. Again, I don't remember this. It's just from that letter. So, but it was also, interestingly, appears to be 32 years to the day of when I think I was molested and when I ruptured my neck. Well, so I ruptured my neck, my disc, on September 1st, 2005. And this letter that my dad dated, it actually said September 2, 1975. So I just feel like it was, I don't know, just crazy that I remembered. I don't know. I just wonder if that was the day that it happened.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I feel like I was rejected. I think I felt I was rejected, and just put that. And I was so really traumatized by it and frozen and didn't know what was going on in my 10-year-old mind, that my brain put it out of it, put it away for that long.
Have you forgiven your brother? Do you see him on a regular basis?
So I've forgiven him. I found out 8 or 9 months later, he told me that he had been molested at summer camp. And so that helped me, just kind of feel like it wasn't malicious towards me, and he never did it again. So yeah, I have forgiven him. I don't presume that anybody, that's a personal decision for everybody, of course. But I don't see him because he lives far away. So I just haven't had that opportunity, and I haven't seen him in a long time. Before I remembered, I haven't even seen him, honestly. So, and now I'm okay. Like, just in the last couple of years, or last year or so, I feel like I would be okay seeing him, even though, like, we communicated a lot. Not only did I, at the beginning, when I first remembered, email him about it. We did a lot of email when I was going through all this deep stuff. I kept emailing because I just needed to process it. And he was kind enough to I say that. I mean, he was, he responded, and it wasn't always easy. There was a lot of anger and a
Sure.
lot of emotions that are not so strong in me right now because I've processed it. So, but even up until just a couple of years ago, when my mother would say, "Oh, maybe we're going to see him," I get this pit in my stomach, like, and I didn't know how I'd react. I was like, I might just freak out and like I didn't know what I was going to do. But I finally talked to him on FaceTime. So I saw him and talked to him about a year and a half ago for the first time about this.
Mhm.
And that was huge. And we had a good conversation. And since then, that pit in my stomach hasn't been there. So I still haven't seen him. So I still don't know what really what happened. But I don't have that visceral reaction to just hearing his name anymore. So
Wow. So, you've kind of made communion with your brother and
mhm,
are your pains down to a level one.
mhm.
Man, I love happy endings.
Yeah. I mean, it's a level 1 to 5. I'll give it that range. At the moment, it's one. It does range, but
Hmm.
exactly. I do feel like a success story because and a happy ending. That I can even be here speaking and feeling so much better. Yeah.
Okay. So, we've been talking and talking and talking. Uh,
Mhm.
I You have a lot of things to promote. It's going to be down in the description of
Okay.
the video when we publish it. So I encourage everybody to go to your links and explore this a little bit more. If not just for general education, maybe you're going through the same thing, and so maybe it's important to, to talk about and to explore. Tell us a little bit about your memoir, The Invisible Key.
Sure. Yeah. When I remembered in 2007, end of 2007, it was actually D-Day. It was December 7th. Um, I had never written, I had never journaled, I never wanted to write a book. I was an environmental scientist. I wrote technical reports.
Hmm.
That's what I did. But once I remembered, I just started writing, and it was just like bleh, coming out of me, and I couldn't stop. Um, just really compulsively, I was writing, and even though my pain was still high, relatively high, I'd just do it as I could. I'd be lying down, writing in notebooks, and just I had like 1,000 pages of my first draft, and yeah, I just had to. I had to understand the story myself, so it was very cathartic, the writing process.
Hmm.
So, and I didn't even realize it at the time. I just, thought my goal was to tell the world how to get rid of chronic pain. Because once I got a lot better after that intensive myofascial release therapy, I was like, well, I'm going to be better. So I'm going to share this with others who are suffering. Um, and I didn't know how long it was going to take. And that my journey is still even ongoing after finishing the book. But so I just kept writing and writing, and ultimately had to pare it down to something manageable to the, I think, 277 pages it is. But yeah, and then, like I said, I even up until, well, in fact, up until the month before, I didn't know if I was even going to say it was my brother. I was going to say relative, because it's still, you don't want to hurt. I don't want to hurt him,
Sure.
honestly. And I didn't. Yeah, it was just I didn't know what it would do to him, his career, I didn't know. And the truth is, most children who offend do not become pedophiles. And they, with treatment, it's like 95 to 98% do not go on to
Mhm.
reoffend. So it's, that is, now that I know that, and I wish the world knew that, because they still see any offender as, potential, and there is still a percentage that do go on to perpetrate. But, anyway, so I just was afraid of saying who it was. I do have two brothers, so I
Mhm.
don't say which. So I felt confident, at least, that I could do that. When it was in fact my other brother who suggested I say brother, because he said, your whole point of this is to tell the truth, and to tell the truth, and you're not telling the full truth. And he was right. So that's when I wrote to my brother who did molest me. And I said, I'm going to do this. And that's when, again, he gave me his, permission, or he gave me his blessing to go ahead and do what I needed to do to heal. So it was healing for me, and I feel like it's been helpful to others. So I just want to tell my story. And another thing I think was important for me is the whole part of minimizing what happened. Like, I think a lot of us as abuse survivors, we just don't want it to be true and try to be okay. We survive by minimizing, I think. And especially when, for me, I'm like, oh, it's only once. It shouldn't have been anything. It's like, why am I reacting like this? The truth is, I was traumatized, like I already said. And I just want other people, because I've had a lot of people come to me now and say, well, I didn't think I should complain. It's not like people who've had much more severe abuse. So just to kind of be the voice for those of us who still are traumatized, and especially outside people might try to minimize it for us, and just to know that it's real and it's traumatizing as well. And
I don't think I've ever said this in my life. But for your brother, um, I have to give him kudos. I mean, he took responsibility. He apologized. He's giving you access to talk to him about it, and he's willing to talk about it and share. And it seems, I believe, anyway, that real pedophiles are born. And I think what he did was a learned behavior from summer camp.
Yeah.
That's what I got out of it anyway.
Yeah, I feel like it was a reaction to what happened to him. He did. He said, and he told me that he realized after the fact that he shouldn't do it, so he stopped, or he didn't do it again. So, and there's a lot of cases now. I know, just talking to so many people now, but a lot of times it just starts with curiosity, and then it can escalate and just continue, and not, if it's not stopped, or if the victim tries to say, and the parent or somebody minimize it and say, oh, that's just normal. And that happens so often. I hear that they just tell them it's normal between siblings, don't worry about it. And this poor child who's victim now feels like nobody listens to them. And it goes on average 5 years is, with sibling sexual abuse. So I agree. My brother, I think I'm really thankful that he kind of saw what was going on, was smart enough, I guess, or whatever, to realize it was wrong. It was a learned behavior. I think a lot of times, even now with pornography and stuff, kids just are acting out and they don't know any better. And like I said, if it's not stopped, it just can escalate and go on. But
yeah, people think that the problem, there's a big renaissance now with people coming forward and talking about their abuse. And everybody thinks that, it's the church, it's the Boy Scouts, it's the Southern Baptist Convention. These are the big institutions.
Right.
And it is bad. I mean, because they knew about it and they covered it up. But the biggest demographic of childhood sexual abuse is the family. And it's so complicated because it's rarely ever reported. And the dynamics are different, because it is your family. So thank you for telling that story. Let me ask you about this. The RAIN Speakers Bureau, what is that and what do you do there?
Well, yeah, so it's just a voluntary group, really, who signs up to be a speaker. And RAIN is Rape, Abuse, Incest National Network, stands for. So it's just people who are willing to speak out. And if opportunities come up, that people contact RAIN, like an organization might say, we want a speaker for this, or a school might say, we want a speaker for something. They'll contact RAIN, and then RAIN throws that out to the Speakers Bureau and says that anybody, does this fit anybody's story? You want to talk about it. And the truth is, incest, even though it's in their name, hasn't been, and like you just said, really, it hasn't been front and center at all, even within RAIN or within a lot of the sexual assault community organizations. So I haven't had an opportunity through them. Just recently, my colleague from Five Waves, the other survivor, Jane Epstein, she was on a panel that RAIN did recently with two other sibling, there were two other child sexual abuse survivors, but one of them was also sibling abuse. And they're getting more into getting involved with Incest Aware, the other group I mentioned, to do more work. So I actually, through them, I still get their emails, and if anything comes up, I'll respond. But I haven't yet had an opportunity through RAINN Speakers Bureau to speak, or one that's in my area, because sometimes they're local. They'll say in Baltimore we have this event, if you can come. So it just depends on where you are usually as well. So, but that's what that is. But you request to be a member, and then they ask you questions and kind of do a little survey, and then accept you.
I see. Interesting. Yeah, getting out. I mean, awareness is what really drives the solution for this, I think.
I believe so too. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we're down to time. Thank you so much for taking the time on your very valuable Sunday to speak to us. I got a lot out of it, and I think a lot of people who are going to listen and view the podcast will as well. Thank you so much for taking time with us. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Maria.